My name is Luis Palazzi. I'm the Vice President of Business Development for Transurban in North America. Now, I could say that a public-private partnership, or P3, as we're saying right now, could be defined as an agreement that establishes the principles and mechanics of a government and a private entity to join forces and collaborate with the purpose of delivering a project or services which are usually provided by the public sector. So under those contracts, the government will provide a long-term lease on future revenues as part of the concession, and that would allow the private sector to recoup its initial investment, right, and ongoing expenses. So remember that, very often in this particular case, P3s are used for new construction or greenfield projects. In that case, you need to have a significant investment upfront to design and build, and then of course there are all operations and maintenance services through the concession line. And in our case, Transurban is a global developer and operator of toll roads, and all of our roads are managed in partnership with the government through P3. So we know quite well what it means to be a P3 partner. In fact, here in the United States, we have a growing network of 53 miles of express lanes, which were among the first ones in the United States that use real-time dynamic pricing as a congestion management tool. Coming back to your question, so while the Congress has been debating about how to pay for infrastructure, we've seen some states and local leaders moving forward with P3s. In one case is Virginia. And in that particular case, our public-private partnership has delivered $4 billion of new highway, bridges, and bicycle lanes and bus routes in the region. But most important, through those projects, we have provided Virginians the option to get back to their home or go to work an hour earlier than before. So that's a real benefit about P3s that we have there. But beyond the concrete and still infrastructure, we think that a well-structured public-private partnership will provide opportunities to adapt to the changing needs of the local communities and the evolving transportation trends. And just to give you one example in our region, through our concession for the 395 express lane, so we contemplated an annual payment of close to $50 million for transit services in Northern Virginia, which is outside of the managed lane services that we're providing to our users. Likewise, through a partnership agreement that we had in Virginia, we were allowed to craft a unique funding scheme to advance state dollars that were used by the local government to enhance other infrastructure assets, which then attracted new corporations, which is a case of Amazon headquarters number 2, which will provide a number of employment opportunities in Virginia. So outside of that's the effect of a well-spent money in infrastructure. So all those are clear samples of the benefits of a P3 and how a P3 can help. It's another tool to improve transportation infrastructure in the United States. For greenfield projects, or those that require a significant capital investment at the beginning, we in Transurban, we advocate for using a pre-development agreement model for P3s, right? So under a P3 scheme, using a PDA approach, a pre-development agreement approach, so the private sector would take the initial risk of developing a project, and which means advancing the design, the environmental permit process, the initial traffic and revenue studies. And in exchange for that initial investment or risk that we're taking, then we expect to have the exclusive right to submit a proposal to our public partner and negotiate a concession contract once all the preliminary studies are completed and the project deemed feasible. It is important to remark that those negotiations will be always done with full transparency, right? So in that case, we will sit together with our public partner and review our design and construction assumptions, as well as our operations and maintenance assumptions on an open book basis. So, and I'll say in that particular case, another benefit of a PDA approach, a pre-development agreement as a P3 model, is that during these early days where the scope is not defined, the private sector can come with different ideas that will be provided or proposed to the public sector, which after reviewing all these ideas, will select the ones that better suit their needs, and then we'll jointly define a project that makes sense for both sides. And I'll say this is not new. This is a proven scheme. In fact, all our assets in Virginia have been developed using a PDA approach, a pre-development agreement approach. And right now, we're working with Maryland on their American Legion Bridge and I-270, I-70 congestion relief plan, which might be one of the largest P3 in the United States, and is using PDA approach, or pre-development agreement approach. I'd say here in the United States, one of the major constraints to improve our transportation infrastructure is the scarcity of funding options. So right now, there are $32 trillion sitting in pension funds. So new infrastructure legislation could unleash the capital by creating ways for the private companies or private developers like Transurban and pension funds to join forces and invest in American infrastructure. And that could be highway construction, new transit system, water treatment plants, and so on. One of the most promising alternatives to deploy that capital into infrastructure is through asset recycling. What is an asset recycling? An asset recycling scheme is another P3 approach. In that particular case, a private company will lease a public asset, an existing asset, providing an upfront payment for the right to operate and maintain that asset according to the standards required by the public partner. And in exchange, will keep a portion of the future revenues generated by that particular asset. So that approach allows the government to use the proceeds from the asset recycling to update and enhance other infrastructure assets in the portfolio, which could be transit system, education, power, whatever they need to, while at the same time, they are ensuring that the leased assets are operated according to their standards. Right? And one case of that approach is Australia. In fact, in 2014, Australia implemented an asset recycling program, which resulted in $17 billion investment in new infrastructure. And those were also taken by two big cities, Sydney and Melbourne, where they saw an infrastructure or a construction boom during those years. We think this is a clear tool that could be used here in the United States. And we have participated in those kind of asset recycling programs, which includes our investment in WestConnex in Sydney, where we led a consortium to pay $6.5 billion for 51% of the toll road assets in that particular case. You could say that the United States is, or most of the states in the United States are governed which are asset rich, and perhaps some cash poor, while the private sector in the United States is cash rich and asset poor. So it makes perfect sense to look at asset recycling as an alternative to fund new infrastructure here in the United States.